everyone, welcome to the Artefacto YouTube channel. My name is Jessica Bryant. To create a great watercolor painting, it's important to carefully plan. You want to choose a reference that allows you to craft a high quality composition. Please watch the full video and you might find it helpful to take some notes or watch it again.
So if I were to look at this and think about simplifying this already, we've taken out color as an issue. So we don't have to worry about that. But again, I might just, if this was just an exercise and I was playing, I might just try to get something close-ish in value, knowing it's going to dry a little bit lighter. And then we've got our a little bit darker through there, a little lighter, oops, a little lighter yet down here. It's supposed to be a little lighter, not darker. So I'll make this one a little darker, so it's something like that. Again, I'm certainly not looking for perfection here. Just I want to convey a loose sense of, of the idea. Well, that might work out. Something like that. Roughly, that's the background structure. The values aren't exact. That's not what I'm worried about right now with you. I just want to look at the idea of detail. If you're playing this out, this is not a perfect value representation. I'm going too fast to pay good attention to that. So sketches and practices can serve different purposes. You don't have to do all the things in every single sketch or every single practice. Honestly, I think that can be paralyzing. Certainly for me, it feels overwhelming when I think I have to get all of the things. Every time I do any little thing, it ends up making me less inclined to want to do the thing in the first place because it feels like too much and like I won't be successful. You have permission. You don't have to be practicing all of the things every time you do something. This is going to bleed and not be at all what we're looking at. But right now I'm kind of trying to just squint and make roughly the shapes I see. My values again are not, I'm doing roughly light versus dark, lighter versus darker. I am not trying to be really close, ties matching. Sorry, talking and painting at the same time are hard for me. Not trying to make it exact in the values. Trying to make myself just see some of those generalized shapes.
Follow the link in the description and register for free. I really want everyone to succeed in painting. I hope my lessons will help you do that. Watercolor can be challenging. It requires thinking differently than in other painting mediums. Taking the time to plan your painting before you start can make the painting process feel easier and more enjoyable, and it really offers a chance to avoid some of the common struggles.
Something like that, kind of, roughly. Again, not trying to make my values exactly match what I see, just kind of the overall shape structure. If I were painting on location, that would be a way to paint something I'm looking at in 5 minutes. And then I could look at this, and if this was just meant to be a painting for the fun of painting, and I'm not really worrying about my exact subject, then I could come back in here and look at, well, maybe if I darken this little streak in the background, that might be a more interesting composition. Maybe I want to darken that. Maybe I want to make that shape larger, so I have a wider, smaller, medium, smaller yet thing happening. Maybe I start playing at this point, and so now this is where I'm using this as a reference, but I am not trying to make my painting look like a photographic copy of my reference. I started with echoing the main shapes I saw because I liked that structure, and now we could just play. So now I could look at, well, what could I do with values to make something interesting through here? And this was not with planning, which you have permission to not plan everything every time too. There are enough of you, and I don't know how each of you like to work. I want to just show a wide variety of possibilities. And if this is wildly not how you're interested in painting, this still might be helpful to think about as just like, there are so many opportunities. There is not a right way for any of these things to go. So again, this is where I'm not even, this could just turn into something completely abstract and look nothing like trees. And that would be very okay as a painting. As an artist with the freedom to do whatever you feel like doing, you could do things like this. This is still a painting of these trees. Would somebody look at it and say, ooh, cool trees? Probably not. So if you're taking a class from me, there's a very good chance that you would not be happy with this, because you're probably thinking, oh, if it looks like trees, my painting needs to look like trees. So if that's you, this would be a fantastic exercise for you to spend some time doing. Give yourself a 5-minute timer cutoff and start with something really fast, really loose, rough value, rough shape, match what you see, and then give yourself permission to play a little bit. Play with, where might I change values? What could I add? Maybe start with just black and white. You could do this with color as well, of course. And as I added these extra different values, I was thinking about, well, I don't want them to all end up the same. I did still kind of get inspiration from where I saw darker values, sort of, but I didn't copy this one because it's centered. And I thought, well, I'm not sure that I would like my biggest chunk of darker value to be centered. So I did some more on the outside edges instead, and then went off center. And you could do this 20 times over, spend, hour and a half, couple hours, and have learned a lot about yourself and practice a lot of different approaches and ways of thinking that might really feed your work well, even if you're a hyper realistic painter. Just because these structures, these shapes are in everything that we paint. And even if you're giving us every bit of detail, being able to see and identify how those details come together and make a cohesive value shape is really important to learning how to have your plan or your outcome match your plan. That makes sense. So again, you've seen me paint this in our course together, much more holding close to this, but here's just another way. Maybe this is a first step in planning. Maybe you take something like this and use it to play with where you might change your value structure before you actually do it in the painting. Maybe you decide you want to move some of these branches around, or you don't like some of the shapes. And so you draw it out, but you're not really sure what it's going to look like because a drawing is so different than a finished painting. Well, something like this is an option. You don't have to have all of the detail to capture the feel. If you put, if we change the shapes of branches here so this tree feels more balanced instead of one-sided, you can accomplish that sense with something like this. If we have an image like this one lends itself really easy to being able to see how this could be just a completely abstracted painting, right? We can invent color, all sorts of things, but such a basic structure happening in this where we could copy the edge lines. This is already largely just a silhouette. So if we paint it exactly as is, it is already a very simplified version, almost as simplified as you could get, while still being completely photorealistic to the location, right? So maybe this is something you use as a starting place for play, and a couple different options. One would be you could take this and just say, okay, I'm going to give myself 30 seconds or 45 seconds. How would I paint this if I had 45 seconds? Which maybe means you're not going to stay close to the edges, maybe, or true to your edges. Maybe you're just going to go like this and say, there's my painting. And that's it. But if someone looked at this, they would never guess that you just did a beach scene, right? And certainly I did not hold to getting my edges accurate, like at all. I didn't even get my reflection to accurate. I just took, hey, these are kind of sweeping lines in the water. Maybe I'll just change that to sweeping lines. But it's fast, it's more expressive. But because of the arrangement of these shapes, this still could make a pretty interesting finished painting, an abstract painting. Now, if it were going to be, there's a few things I would need to change compositionally. This little shape appears far too interesting, so I would probably need to get rid of that guy. And I might choose to make this a little bigger or something to be a little better balanced to this. But something like that, that's almost, it's not quite, but it's almost a decent standalone composition just by itself. Or we take something like that and we take a little more time. Maybe you draw it. I'm not taking the time. So, imagine with me here, if I took the time to actually try to get this fairly well drawn out. It's not super, I want to get on to other things. So imagine with me that this was actually pretty well drawn out versus very simplified. Now, what if I stayed really true? Maybe I'll switch brushes because I want to be really careful with my edges, but what if I got really inventive with color? What if this was one where I got to play with color completely? And so maybe I pull out some, I don't know, red and yellow and blue, and still hold, maybe I'm going to hold to the the edges, my big shapes. Maybe I'm going to try to stay with relative value. Maybe I want more room to play, but I'm going to keep the values relative to each other. So darkest dark, lightest light are still going to be the same shapes and in the same placement, but maybe the way I handle them is really different. So maybe instead I allow myself to do, maybe I should have done this with a big brush. I love a 1-inch flat brush because it forces you not to get into these really precious tiny little brush strokes all over the place. And so often it's easy to just start making extra marks, extra strokes where they're not needed. I had an instructor, when I was first working in watercolor, who I pushed him to be meaner to me because he was such a supportive, happy, kind instructor. It's like, no, really, really, I'm trying to get good at this. I want you to be more harsh in your criticisms and critiques of things. Tell me what I can do. So he gave me all these different exercises, and one of my favorite ones was a portrait as realistic as possible with a 1-inch flat brush, 25 brush strokes. And that's it. Make up the color, do anything else you want, but you only have 25 brush strokes and it has to look as realistic as possible, and you have to use that brush. And I think my size was determined for me as well. And just what a fantastic way to turn on your brain and really have to think about what you're doing. Because you've got to. You're not, how are you going to do this? How can I? And then you start to see what's happening, and you look at a portrait, you look at somebody's face, and you start seeing how, okay, well, maybe I simplify this to 5 values or 10 values or whatever. But then where do all those value shapes connect? Do they connect with each other? Could I take my brush, set it down here, and manage to do one big wormy stroke? And so technically that's one brush stroke, but I managed to cover a really large area with my one brush stroke and unify all the shapes of a similar value and color. And that is such a helpful thing. And that's an exercise I would highly encourage you to make yourself do. I don't necessarily enjoy those kinds of exercises, but they really help with, personally, just me. I didn't like playing scales on piano either. But they really do help. So if you can make yourself, or, get a spouse or roommate or child, somebody in your house, if you have somebody in your house, or a friend, to call you up and say, hey, it's time to do one of your exercises, and just make yourself sit and do it. Give yourself a timer, give yourself parameters, and try lots of different approaches because they all inform each other. And the ability to do something fast and loose and very intentional means when you go back to doing lots of detail, you have all this information that might affect how you choose to approach that detail. Maybe you're somebody who uses 50 brush strokes for every tiny little shape, and maybe you start to learn that, oh, that shape only needs like 2. And it can make painting easier, faster, more fun, more varied. It gives you more options. Or maybe you don't use some of those things. Maybe you practice them and say, that's just not for me. But now you know that's not for me, and you had practice in handling them. And I'm just playing here. Now I'm thinking about, well, I got too much red on this side. maybe I want to make sure I add some heavier red here. I don't know. Point is just, I can use this as inspiration. I can change colors, hold to values, and have interesting things happen that way. And this might be something that would be an excellent style of exercise as well. Trying to do this fast, not time consuming, because there are a lot of things still that I would like to talk about and practice. So roughly, well, I guess this kind of turns into one big shape. And maybe if I did all of that down there, maybe I'd want to come back into a little something up here too, because I don't want those shapes to mix. It's just going to be, I don't know, maybe a hint of the same orange to balance out the bottom of the painting. So that was really fast, but if I made you spend an hour or two, you could make something that seems really inventive and yet highly realistic. If your edges exactly match, if your values exactly match, you can do whatever you want to do with color, and it's still going to look very realistic, though also very creative and imaginative. Point of that is just to make sure we so easily hone in on color and the importance of color, and we get so attached to color, and I'm right in there with everybody else. I care so much about color, and I will spend so much time trying to get my color right where I want it. It is so not the most important thing to conveying a sense of mood. Usually some color has an effect for sure, but your value is so much more dominant in that. And you can see, like, I could keep going with this and have so much fun for a very long time.
So Jessica, quick question.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so on this haystack rock painting, when we uploaded our photos for critique, I noticed my comment and several of the other artists that big rock, the critiquer noticed that they were too opaque. So when I look at this, reference photo, and I'm not seeing a lot of any light, shining off of it or coming through. And so
Correct.
should it be opaque?
So opacity, I don't know, not knowing for sure what was in the head of the person giving the commentary or the critique for you, I could be wrong here, but a couple different possibilities. One, so opacity in my mind refers to the texture and the look of how the paint is applied to paper. So transparent versus opaque. If we get, you can get very dark pigments, but if they're applied in a transparent manner, your light is reflecting off the paper through the paint. And if you apply it in a more opaque manner, the light is reflecting off the surface of the paint instead of the surface of the paper through the paint. So the way you can see that, if you have, I don't have a great example right here to show you. If I had a couple of dark, dry, maybe I'll do this on purpose and can show you later. If something is more opaque, when you hold up your paper with a light and kind of tip it, and so the light's reflecting off of it, if you can see a sheen on the surface of the paint, then you've applied your paint in a more opaque manner. If you're just seeing the richness of very dark and you're not getting this kind of sheen coming off the surface, then it's opaque. Or I'm sorry, then it's transparent. So what's the difference in how you apply those? If I need something very dark, if I use a transparent pigment, which almost everything on my palette is transparent anyways, opaque does not necessarily mean that you're into a gouache or acrylic or something else. A titanium white or Chinese white, those are opaque pigments. There are other colors that have opaque tendencies. So yellow ochre has a bit of opacity to it. Cerulean blue, and that, again, color names depend on the maker. So the brands I use yellow ochre has a little bit of opacity to it. Cerulean blue that I use has a little bit of opacity to it. I sometimes love that for certain kinds of effects, but I have to be really careful how I handle those if I'm going to submit a painting to a competition where they have transparency requirements, because those pigments very easily turn opaque. You could also very easily get opaque from transparent pigments depending on how they're applied. So for instance, if I've got this is my neutral tint, if I just apply this really thick and inky, one go, and now I just leave it, it's going to dry very transparently. However, if I do the same thing, I'm gonna let that dry and I'll come back and do a couple more layers. You hit a point where you've got, I think what's happening from like a science point of view is that those bits of granulated pigment that are in your paint start to stack up on each other. And when you do one fluid approach, they settle in the water and gravity kind of evens that out to a certain degree. But the more layers you put on, the more those are stacking on top of each other, and then your light is reflecting off of the paint surface instead of being able to get through the paint surface to the paper. Does that make sense? Maybe.
It does. It does. But to get
And
that
that,
value, of that big rock, it's so dark.
yeah,
I mean, even with
yes,
your blue example on the right there, it's
so much lighter.
it's so much lighter. So if you were to
Yep.
continue putting more and more values on that blue rock there to get at the same value, um,
Yes.
can you maintain the transparency of it, or is it going to turn opaque looking?
So I can, because I've specifically practiced that. Um, it is a possibility, but what pigments you're using and how you apply them is then really important. And I'd like to back up a second and say that there is nothing wrong with opacity in a watercolor. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Watercolor is a medium. You use it however you want to use it and whatever look you want to get. I sometimes have paintings that have a very opaque feel to them because of the way I layer the paint, and that is what I'm actually after for those. Now, there's a difference between the paint having an opaque feel and the paint looking opaque because it's overworked and has a lot of layers that have been pushed around in ways that the paint has built up in more awkward ways. There's, like anything, there's more and less attractive ways to do it. So in my personal opinion, with more opaque applications of paint, still, like if you're doing it transparently, the more you can be intentional in how it gets applied so that you're getting the look you want instead of accidentally having something end up more opaque. I would prefer that for everybody, because then it was on purpose and you are more likely to like what happened. But there is nothing wrong with using white pigment in watercolor. They make white watercolor pigment. It is still watercolor. Absolutely. It is not gouache just because it's white. Gouache is a different medium. It has different components in it, different things. It's not the same as watercolor. And I say this because it irks me that there's such purist ideals in watercolor that I don't see the same in other mediums. And it's everything from, oh, it should be more impressionistic, or it should be more loose and flowy and washy, or it needs to be transparent, or it needs to be, it's a medium and you get to do whatever you want to do with it. You can mix it with other mediums. You can build things in hugely thick layers. You could paint straight from the tube. You get to handle it however you want to handle it. But pulling back to, yeah, I think it's really worth learning how to paint in a beautiful, transparent, flowy manner, because it's just a tool. And then you have it to use and apply wherever and whenever you want to. Right, that's got nice
That makes sense. Thank you. Yeah. Well, no, the reason I
yeah.
love watercolor is because of its transparency. So,
Me too, right.
okay.
And honestly, even the way I like to build what I would call a more opaque application, it still is largely transparent, and it still has, like, it's a very different look than you would get out of oil or acrylic. And I too, I love that. I mean, that's, I think most of us who are attracted to watercolor, that's a big part of why. Okay, I've got my first layer and my second is working on dry. Actually, even just the first, I'm not sure if you can, oh boy, can I get, oh yeah. Do you see on this one, it's dry, but do you see how there's a couple little dots of light right in there? Can you see that? Oh, it's lighter
Yes.
in a few spots.
Mhm.
That is where the sheen is coming off the paint surface. The rest, this one is dry, and everything else just looks dark and inky. And then we hit those spots, and that's because it was a very wet application and I ended my brush strokes there. And so I got an extra thick pool, and that extra little work with my brush just changed how the pigment settled on that corner. So even just one application, there's a possibility of ending up a little bit opaque. I don't think there's anything wrong with that inherently. And it's not something you can easily pull back from either. So if this is something that really matters to you, it's a true investment of time and focus in how you're applying your paint, how much water you have, experimenting with the paints you like to use, and your mix of water and your brushes and how they work and how they apply the paint. But ultimately, when you're getting a more opaque look, what's happening is you're getting that stacking of pigments so that the light's reflecting off the pigment instead of through the pigment. So when I was painting these, I said I wasn't necessarily going to hold to the value, but I was going to hold to the value relationships. And as you notice, this is significantly lighter. I will sometimes do that. I have painted this an awful lot of times. And one of my favorite ways that this rock comes out sometimes is I hold very true to the edge. The overall value is the darkest, heaviest dark, and it is really close to this dark, but I will drop in different color. And because I know this location so well, I've been there many, many times, I know exactly what happens on this rock. There's this really cool grass, like plant covered area on this slope, and the rest is just this dramatic rocky thing. So I will do like hints of almost a greenish and hints of leaning towards brown or warms through here. So I've got this cooler, this warmer. And for anyone who knows it, then you get this feel of, oh, it really feels like that rock, because you know you would see those bits of those colors in there. But I'm not putting the texture of rock in. I'm not putting the texture of plants. It's just hinting at it with color and letting the value come up just a little bit in a couple of areas so that I can see the color through the inky dark of it. But, you know, that's just one option, one opportunity. And I could start like this, and I could come in if I wanted to and pull back over and make some of those, you know, pull the value in darker in some way if I wanted to. I could also have started with value. If I used something like neutral tint, I could have started with rough value and then dropped color into it. But see here, now I'm much closer in my value, but I'm still seeing some color coming through, and it's offering me a little bit of variation that feels like maybe the light's hitting it or not, or something. Now the sun is directly behind it, so realistically we would not be getting a whole lot of light, maybe a little bit reflecting back off the wet beach and water, but you know, that's, photographs are going to look very different than what your eye perceives in person. So there is so much room for personal choice in how you want to handle even the values and color from something that you see, because the same camera in the same place, the same moment is going to catch color differently versus what your eye is going to see looking at it in person. So this, we could go from complete abstract to something more in the middle to the way we painted it in the course, and anywhere in between. When we get into things that are a little more complex, like something like this, might feel like you have less options for that, because boy, it's already really simplified. What else could I do? And not having seen everyone's paintings of this, I don't know how each of you chose to handle it. You saw how I handled it in the course. And I chose to stay really pretty detailed through here, but I did lose quite a bit of detail back here. We got a little bit of the outline of these trees so that for sure it reads as tree. But this is a great example of, even when you look at this up close, like, yeah, you can start to pull out individual trees back through here in this middle area. I don't mean the edge line. That's easy to see where those trees are. And up here, you can see individual trees. But we get back through here and it really is just value and color mixing and mingling. So if you learn to have pretty good control of working wet on wet and know just where to catch it, these are things that are really easy to apply that way. You can also apply it carefully and controlled, dry on dry, and come up with almost the same look, because ultimately it's about shape and value and color, and there are lots of different ways to get to an end result. Now, dry on dry runs the risk that you overwork and use too many brush strokes and end up with a whole textural thing that looks nothing like wet on wet would look. But if you're careful and intentional with how you're laying your paints down, you can have a lot of control on where your values and things go, without having, how do I say this? So if I do, maybe it's easier just to show, if I did, say, oh, I better have a plan here. Let's say I'm gonna have some red tree-like shapes. So I'm making this up, I'm not following something. Let's pretend I'm following something. And so I'm being careful about the edge line of the shape. So that's fairly true to what I see, let's say. Now I can let's let that one just dry. And I'll try to do another. This one I'm going to do some, while it's still wet, some other color dropped in. So now I'm going to really think about what's my moisture level here? What am I working with so that when I bring in another color, I can predict what's going to happen. So I know what's in my brush. I might actually give it one more swish to make sure that that's a fully saturated body of the brush, because that will hold paint differently than a dried out body of the brush. And I'll try to make more or less the same shape here. Well, they won't exactly succeed. Maybe it'll be close enough. That's too much water. So it'd be easier if I had traced something out ahead of time. That's okay. Hopefully maybe close enough to give you the idea. Okay, so while this is still wet, what I'm going to do is watch my paper. And I should have had this ready ahead of time, but I didn't. So ideally, you will have all your puddles ready to go before you do something wet and wet, big area or small area. And I want the same amount of moisture that I had in my first puddle, the same feel on my brush, nice saturated body. Now I'm going to watch if this will pick up on the camera. Maybe it's got a bit of a glisten to it. Oh, there you go. See how it's kind of shiny? As that just disappears, as it goes from being shiny to matte or not shiny, that's my perfect timing. And I did not paint that well because the bottom is drying out before the top is. So I should have paid more attention. That should be a smooth, even distribution of water across that entire shape if I want to do, if I want the perfect conditions for wet and wet. So I don't have perfect conditions. That's all right. That's too much paint on the brush for what I want to control. And I'm just dropping it in. Now, the wetness of that red shape is, and the wetness of what's on my brush now and how much paint is on there will make a very different effect each time. So if and that's something just to learn from practice, if the red was wetter and my blue is wetter, it would have spread and they would have maybe become completely commingled and turned to the same value and color. if it's really dry, or if, let's say, the red is drier than the blue, I will get blooms happening, which sometimes can be a beautiful look that you might specifically want to get. They're usually regarded as a mistake, but not necessarily. You might be able to do something really cool with bloom shapes in your work. So let's say that's the look I'm after. That's not quite dry, but when this is dry, we're gonna see if I can approximate that same look, dry on dry instead of wet on wet. And the only reason I'm bringing that up is because this can be a faster approach to simplifying areas. So if I have a hillside like this, if I'm careful how I apply it, I could do some very quick and easy wet and wet. Quick and easy if you put in the practice to have the control and know what it's going to do and be able to handle it. So it's not something that's intuitive for most people right out of the box. It takes some practice. So be nice to yourself if you try that stuff and it doesn't work out so well. It doesn't mean that you're a terrible painter. It means that you don't yet have an inherent automatic understanding of what's going to happen and where you want your paint to be. But this can work really nicely, and you can do this in small areas. We wouldn't have to do this whole thing all at once in one go. We could pick one area, let's say right through here, we've got this nice lighter buffer around the edges. So if I was going to do that, maybe I would wet a shape like, I don't know. This is meant to be just water. It's blue, so you can see what I'm doing. But let's say this is the area I'm going to do, and around this area is fog. If I bring my water out a little further, and even if I had some pigment to it, or a little further yet, I could even blend this right out into fog. So I could do this with just water first and have it ready to go, and then just stay in this smaller area and let it blend into where it's foggier, but then I have this natural buffer. Or if I'd put down the lightest grayishy, greenish-y value and color I see in here as my first step, if I put that down, then I could blend out the outside edge of that to blend into where the fog is. And now I've got one smaller shape that I can do wet on wet. And I can leave that be. When it's dry, I can wet my next little section and do the same thing through there. Let that dry, come into the next little section. You don't have to do a whole big area. Just because it looks like one big cohesive area doesn't mean that you have to paint it all in one big cohesive go. There are usually natural shapes within shapes that you can find, or ways like maybe there's an edge in here just a little bit. That would be a place that you could easily have this be a boundary between, I'm going to do this shape, let it dry, come back in this shape. And then if I get a little overlap or something else, it's okay because I can see this shape happening. And maybe I choose to mimic it someplace else so it looks intentional, and then nobody has a clue I didn't paint that as one big go. Well, this is risky. I'm not sure that's dry enough, but we're gonna try it.
I hope this video is helpful for you. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we assist all individuals in mastering the skills of painting and immersing themselves in the wonderful world of art. Don't forget to follow the link in the video description and register for my course. See you there soon.